All right, so welcome back. The next question is about materials and diversity of materials. We all know that we are surrounded with a wide range of materials, and each of those material contain or has its own set of characteristics. And but before we go on to this, let's do some revision. As you know, these slides are all about revising your P3 and P4 topics. So let's revise what materials are all about, right? So we know that there's a wide range of materials all around us, and then they can be classified in many ways. We have gone through this in the question before this video. That there is you can occupy. You can classify. You can classify materials into how well they let light pass through. We know there's opaque, translucent, and transparent materials, and we've gone through this in greater detail in the video you watched last week. We also know that materials can also be classified into two groups, whether they are able to sink in water or whether they are able to float in water. We know that these are some of the examples of materials that sink in water. Metal coins, metal paperclip, basically anything that's made up of only metal can sink and normally do sink. Rocks and pebbles, all right, and glass, marbles, and there's a lot of other things that can sink in water, but I'm not going to list them all here because there wouldn't be enough space. So basically, a lot of things do sink in water. It's very easy to find out. Just take that object, and put it in a basin of water, and you can see whether it floats or whether it sinks. Now, objects that float in water are normally made out of wood. Okay, some liquids float in water, like oil. All right, and many things made out of plastic floats in water. Now, things that are also filled with air also tend to float in water. So that explains why some of you ask me, Mr. Zaki, you say metal floats in water, metal sinks in water. I've seen ships and containers, in water that floats. But that's because even though the ship is made up of metal, but the ship is made in such a way that there's a lot of air trapped in between those metal. All right, and because it is filled with air, it helps it to float. So you can imagine the ship that you are talking about, that some of you asked me about, right? It is actually made out of metal all around, but it is actually hollow inside, and inside it you can actually find lots of space where air can fill, and that's why it floats. Similarly, uh, if you can have a container made out of glass or made out of rock, and if there is a lot of air, more air than glass and more air than rocks and pebbles inside that container, that thing can float too. All right, so air-filled objects allow things to float, right? And so, this is just a revision of how you can you can classify materials into things that sink in water and objects that float in water. Okay, but if the objects are made up of just the material, and you discount the fact that the air is inside, then it is easier. So metal coin is just everything metal, it will sink. Rocks and pebbles are made up of entirely rocks and pebbles, there's no air in between, so it will sink. Same goes with glass. But if it is made of wood, just solely wood, then it tends to float. If it's just simple plastic with nothing else, then it will float. All right. Okay. We also know that we choose the material to make any object. It depends on really what we want to use the object for. All right. So, uh, also note that, you know, when we use words like strength, flexibility, and waterproof, it has a specific meaning in science. So, for example, strength is how uh, the material is able to uh, carry loads without breaking. Okay, that's what we mean by strength. Flexibility is again how well the material is able to bend without breaking. Okay, so strength and flexibility has got to do with the amount of load and without breaking. And when we talk about waterproof, whether an object is waterproof or not, it depends on whether that object is able to absorb water or the object is not able to absorb water. So a piece of paper is not waterproof because it's able to absorb water, whereas plastic is definitely waterproof because it does not allow any water to pass through. It does not absorb any water. Okay, now knowing that all this, having revised all this, now at this point, if you still do not, uh, if I've gone too fast in the explanation of these themes and topics that we are revising, feel free to repeat the video, replay it, pause it at necessary points in the video so that you can understand. Remember to listen actively, all right? And if you still have questions about them, email me, all right? Now let's go to the question now. The diagram below shows a party tent where guests can stay under hot or rainy days, and normally this is outside. So under hot days, it will block the sunlight so that people can be under it comfortably. Under rainy days, it will block the rain, all right? So it will not allow the guests and whatever is under the tent to be wet. Now, Linda carried out some tests to find out if the material is suitable for making the canopy of the tent. So the canopy is the top part, which shields the guests and everything under it from the hot light, from the sunlight, and from the rain. So test A, does the material float or sink in water? Now, whether this material sink or float in water, do you think it's relevant for you to have a canopy in the field or outdoors, and whether it sinks or float in water? Well, I don't think so. It is not necessary for the canopy to be subjected to this test, whether it floats or whether it sinks in water. Let's look at test B. Is the material waterproof? Definitely, this is important because the reason why we have a tent is to protect the guests from rain, and for it to protect the guests from rain, it has to be waterproof. Test C. Does light pass through the material? Actually, again, the reason why we have a tent is to protect the guest from very strong sunlight. All right, imagine in the hot afternoon sun, and if the canopy allows light to pass through, then the people under the tent would be subjected to the hot afternoon sun, and that's not the reason why we have the party tent. We would like to shield the guests, protect the guests from strong sunlight. So test C is important. Test D, is the material smooth or rough to the touch? Now, normally the canopy is right on top, whether it's smooth or whether it's rough, nobody's going to touch it uh, after it has been set up. Okay, so uh, knowing all this, then make your choice. One, two, three, or four. Which one do you think? Which of the tests do you think it is important? All right. So if again, like I say, another reminder, if you don't understand, do look at these reminders, this set of reminders, and so that you can do the necessary. Thank you.